So first, I would like to thank you for sitting down and taking your time out to this interview with me. I greatly appreciate it.
You are very welcome.
Thank you. First question, can you please state your name and your degree?
My name is Helen Crump, and my highest degree is a doctorate in feminist studies.
Studies. Why did you decide to study feminist studies?
Well, it started because I was earning my master's in English at Mississippi State University and decided that I wanted to um, look into gender issues, especially because I didn't seem to notice a lot of women writers in my program or that I was engaging. And so I kept wondering about women's voices, the absence of women, and in that sense, also the kind of silencing of women. And so while working on my master's, I decided to pursue a graduate minor in women's studies. And after doing that, the classes I had, a lot of the conversations I was having, I decided that I wanted to pursue something akin to gender and women's studies as a doctorate. And at that point, I decided to attend the University of Minnesota and its Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies program. And it just so happens that when you graduate, you don't have a doctorate in gender and women's studies, but you actually have one in feminist studies. So, looking at sort of the broader picture of, or the broader theory that sort of frames a lot of what gets discussed and talked about and represented in gender and women's studies.
All right. Now, I know you just said that you attended Mississippi State. Where did you complete your, can you explain more about where you completed your undergraduate and graduate degrees?
Oh, I absolutely can. Well, I am an alumna of Jackson State University. While at Jackson State, I did pursue my degree in English, which is it's very nice to be back in the English department. But I pursued my degree in English with a minor in education. I knew that I wanted to teach. I initially thought that I wanted to teach on the high school level. I changed my mind, and now I am pursuing a graduate degree in. I'm sorry, I got a little distracted.
No problem.
Okay, so as I said, I pursued my undergraduate degree in English with a graduate minor in education. I knew that in English with an undergraduate minor in education, I knew that I wanted to pursue teaching, but I eventually decided that I didn't want to do that on the high school level. I wanted to do so more on the college level because I wanted to work with students who potentially were a little bit more um, mature in certain cases, also who were potentially open to some broader, deeper conversations, more critical thinking. And so I actually have found that through teaching on the college level. I pursued my graduate degree, as I said, I'm a master's at Mississippi State University. And that degree was in English as well, but I also pursued the graduate minor in women's studies. And then from there, I went to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities to pursue the graduate degree in feminist studies. And while there, I also pursued a graduate minor in African American and African studies and a concentration in literary studies. So I was
It
doing a lot.
was a lot. Was there a particular reason you decided to attend Jackson State for undergraduate?
Pretty much, I grew up on Jackson State's campus. My father actually teaches here now. At the time, he was a campus minister at Jackson State University. My mother was in graduate school here when I was growing up. And also, because my father was campus minister, he was over the Wesley Foundation, United Methodist Student Movement here at Jackson State. So a lot of the students from Jackson State University were constantly in-house when I was at home, were babysitters, and are now my god brothers and sisters. That's how I classify them, their family. And, sort of having all of these people come through my home, of having this sort of intimate knowledge and connection to Jackson State University, it seemed, uh, something to consider when considering my college choices. But I probably would say what really kicked it was that at the time, Dr. Maria Luisa Alvarez Harvey, and you have to say her whole name, was the dean of the Honors College at the time. And I graduated salutatorian from my high school, and she recruited me to come to Jackson State. She offered me a full scholarship with a book stipend, and I said yes. it also paid for room, well, the full scholarship paid for room and board as well. So it was really, not just tuition, but it was all of that. And it was a really nice offer at the time, and I said yes. So the connection of being able to financially afford college as well as having that intimate connection to it seemed a no-brainer at the time.
All right. While at Jackson State getting your undergraduate degree,
Mm-hmm.
did you have any what's a good way to ask this? Did you experience any research, or were you in research classes? Did you participate in any type of research in your undergraduate?
Um, One, you're asking me to think back quite a bit right now, and I'm fairly sure that there was some element of research in my pursuit of the undergraduate minor in education.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of my classes, and of course, being an English major, you're constantly doing some kind of research because you're constantly writing papers, and these are not just papers where you express your opinion or your ideas, but you have to choose a topic and support that with outside sources. So definitely we had what is now Comp Two, or I guess it's Comp Two then, which has a research element to it anyway. But then, like I said, by virtue of being an English major, pretty much everything I did included some form of research. Now, the majority of it did include actual texts more so than sort of what you're doing now, sort of interviewing people. And I potentially even wish that something that I'd done along the way included that. But yeah, there were definitely elements of research throughout my undergraduate career.
All right. And during graduate school, when you were getting your master's
Mm-hmm.
and then, of course, your doctorate, what was your dissertation about?
Um, hmm. My dissertation is an examination of the theoretical perspectives of Black women writers of the African diaspora, focusing specifically on maternal narratives, sort of how they talk about issues of motherhood, mother-daughter relationships, mother's voices, mother as place, and things of that nature. But specifically in regards to the African diaspora, it's exploring what that concept means, both for the people in it as well as in terms of geographical space. And it's exploring this idea of how the authors of these sort of diasporic novels aren't just telling stories of diaspora, but are very specifically using their novels as a way to theorize what they perceive the African diaspora to be and to look like. So that's kind of what my research has been about and is in several ways still about.
All right. And what led you to pick that specific topic to research?
Oh my gosh, you're asking the difficult questions. Um, well, I guess it kind of goes back to what I said about pursuing women's studies, is that I was
Mm-hmm.
looking for the missing voices. I was looking for the missing experiences. I was looking for something about um, the experiences of people who looked like me in certain ways. Not exactly, but in certain ways. So I was looking for the voices and experiences of Black women. And I was looking into this idea of Black women as connected in several ways. We talk about sort of Black sisterhood and have questions about what that means and what that looks like and sort of who's involved in that. But I was looking for the stories, the narratives, the fiction, because I love fiction literature, that sort of explored that concept. And it just so happened that one semester I was taking an independent study class with Dr. Gwendolyn Pugh, who now teaches at Syracuse University. And in that reading list we developed, there were a lot of books that seemed to focus on Black women's experiences and Black women's narratives, Black women's voices. And of those works, several of them involved this concept of the African diaspora. So there was Sandra Jackson Opoku's The River Where Blood is Born, Dion Brand's At the Full and Change of the Moon, and Maurice Conde's Desarada, and some work by Paul Marshall as well. And so after reading all of these works, I noticed that they all seem to address this idea of diaspora and movement from the continent to different countries, and sort of expanding this idea of Blackness, of Black identity, of Black womanhood. And So from that point, it's like, okay, I know what I want to write about. I want to write about Black women as part of this concept of diaspora and sort of what their identity looks like within this context. So, yeah, it was that independent study course that just kind of sparked me into what then became my dissertation.
All right. Was your research qualitative or quantitative?
Oh, it was very much qualitative.
And why is that?
Um, well, in part, it was qualitative because it focused on literature, sort of analyzing the literature and what the literature had to say. Um, it didn't really do much in terms of number counting,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of statistics in any fashion. Uh, it didn't include, well, yeah, so it didn't include any of those things. It was basically just looking at the text to see what the text had to say, looking at the text to figure out how I would interpret it, how it sort of spoke to or challenged or resisted or whatever this concept of African diaspora that I was working with. And since that's mostly what I wanted to do, I wanted to read the literature and to see what the literature had to say. In part because, as I tell my students today, even, I don't see a piece of literature as necessarily just a piece of literature just for entertainment. That in some way it's supposed to get us to thinking about the society and the communities and the world broadly that we live in, and sort of how we interact or engage within that society, those communities. What kinds of issues are we dealing with? And I think the authors are using their literature as a means of pushing us there, of getting us to think about that, to see things that maybe we don't typically see because they're not part of our personal experiences or what have you. So, like I said, I wanted to see what the literature had to say about this concept of diaspora and Black women's experiences. Specifically, what were Black women saying in terms of, well, this is my experience in diaspora, or this is what I've observed from other Black women in diaspora, or in my relationships with other women or other people in the African diaspora. So, because it was doing those things, then the qualitative approach seemed most appropriate to what I was trying to do.
It's very interesting. And how important do you think it is for undergraduates to complete a course in research methods?
Absolutely important. I mean, especially if they are contemplating graduate school in any capacity or any career, honestly, where they have to rely on outside sources. Because while courses such as your introduction to English or English composition 2 or something like that may have research components, I do think students benefit from having a course that very specifically focuses on the ways that you do research, the ways that you carry out research, and to the kinds of research that you get to do. It becomes a more extended or hopefully more elaborated means of thinking through what kinds of sources are proper sources, are accurate sources, or useful sources. So basically, the process of evaluating the kinds of sources you use in doing your research. It becomes an opportunity to really explore a topic and to see what other um, persons who are working, or various persons who are working on that topic, are doing with their research. It becomes a means of seeing how, like I said, whether you do qualitative or quantitative, how having the numbers there potentially make a difference to the way that we understand the narrative of research versus potentially having real voices where you actually get to interview people. And so you have people actually telling you what their experiences are versus two, whether or not you're reading literature and you're evaluating that literature for yourself. So, I think it's important. It becomes a foundation, whether the person is going on to grad school, continuing their career, going to law school, whatever it is, it has some value. And even if the student does none of that, that person has still been taught that whatever you're presented is based on the way that the person chose to do the research, to find the sources to support it. So, do you believe something more because you hear it from someone verbatim, or that this is quoted from this person? Do you believe it more when you see the statistics? And again, when you take that research course, you get to realize that sometimes people can shade the statistics to benefit what they're trying to say. But it's through that research course that I think you get that information, that you get to thinking about that thing, that you're pushed or encouraged to think more critically about what people present to you. So, absolutely, I think it's a valuable course that students should have to take.
From when students research, what do you think? Because a lot of students actually don't like to take part of the research process, and a lot of it is because they're kind of scared to conduct the research. What do you think scares them the most about researching?
Now, that's a really interesting question. And maybe at some point you can tell me as a student what scares students. And I think it depends on what the student is researching, honestly. Um, if I think some people, if you're sort of socially anxious, you have certain social anxieties, then if your research involves qualitative research where you have to interview someone, that itself can be kind of nerve wracking because you're trying to be open, to pay attention as people are talking so that you'll know how to ask the next question. You're also trying to be, friendly and encouraging or whatever. Um, and then potentially, depending on what you're researching, you may be asking people personal questions. Even if you don't consider them personal, the person may consider that question personal. So, it, doing qualitative research in that way can be a little nerve wracking. Sort of something that people tend to shy away from. Even if they want to do it, there's something that maybe pushes them back. And then when you're doing qualitative and you're dealing with the numbers, statistics is not easy. I've never had to take it, fortunately, in part because I do more qualitative work and my research was qualitative. I did not have to take the statistics courses. But as I've heard from many people, statistics is very difficult sometimes, or at least for many people, it can be very difficult. And so, figuring out how to do the numbers, how to evaluate the numbers, what questions to ask in that regard can be daunting. And sort of depending on the requirements of the assignment, you can have students who kind of shy away from it. And then it takes work. We do have a lot of technology that allows, today, and is definitely much different from it has been in the past. So technology allows certain things to seem a lot easier, but you still have to know what words to put into the system to get what you want. Everything won't come to you just because you put in, okay, I want to do research on women and domestic violence and why women leave. You'll get some hits, but you won't get everything. So you have to figure out how to change your language, to get what you need, to consider sources that don't seem like they're giving you what you need, but some information could be in there, which means you have to read. And unfortunately, a lot of students do shy away from having to read things, especially when it's just for a project, unfortunately, versus something they're really interested in. Sometimes students find themselves, I think, doing research just and they can't figure out what they are interested in, so they end up just choosing something. And that process of having to just work on something that you really have no interest in can be daunting as well and kind of turn students away from wanting to do research. I think if there's a way to make them understand either the significance of the research they're doing, if they could see how what they're doing will have a broader impact, or even if they could figure out something that's of significant interest to them, then their enthusiasm for doing it would be a little bit different, I think. Yeah, but I mean, that's a really good question. I would actually love to ask a bunch of students what kind of, maybe I'll ask my students because they're doing many research papers right now. But sort of what pushes you from wanting to do research? And I admittedly, kind of based on what I've talked about
Hmm.
with some students, I would say it is having to do the research because it's a lot of reading and sifting through things if you're going to do it right. And then, of course, having to write it up because most of them will say that they don't like writing. Some of them write very well. They have really great narrative structure. Their sentences are beautiful. Their ideas come across clearly, but for some reason, they don't like writing, and not all of them don't have that talent, admittedly. So I can understand why they would shy away from it. But yeah, that is a good question for students. Why don't y'all want to write?
That is. Is there any is there any advice you would give students currently in the research process that may like it or maybe not even like it that much, but that's currently in the research?
Um, well, I guess the first one is, if possible, choose something that you're interested in. And even if, it doesn't have to be your typical topic, because we do have a list of those typical topics that, are sort of up for grabs. But think about something you might be interested in, something that you've never really seen or heard about being researched before. And in this day and age, you can research anything. I mean, even the concept of Afrofuturism in hip hop music or in art or whatever. We just recently had a Planet Deep South conference here at on Jackson State's campus through the COFO at Fannie Lou Hamer Center, or the Fannie Lou Hamer at COFO Center, something like that. I'm confused about the name. Um, but at COFO, and so we had people talking about Afrofuturism in these beautiful ways in regards to music broadly, in regards to hip hop, Southern hip hop very specifically, talking about it in regards to art, George Clinton and the Funkadelics. I think I said that right. Um, talking about the way we can reread literature like Toni Morrison, that we've read her beloved one way. And so now going back and reading it as a horror book or reading it as a part of horror futurism. I know, right? And so it's, so these are like ways that we never really think about doing research, but now we can. We have social media, and even looking at social media as a means of, or a process or a way to sort of advocating a certain social justice idea. So social media isn't just for sort of sharing your likes and your likes, so that you had dinner at such and such a place, or you went to this mall or whatever, that it becomes more of a social activism tool where you can share an idea or a concern or an issue or something with your peers, who will share it with other peers, who will retweet it, who will Instagram it, who will Facebook it, who will whatever else can be done with it. And so that something that was initially just, between you and a few friends now becomes something that spans the globe in a matter of minutes, or definitely in a matter of hours. There's so much you can really do with research. So find something you're interested in. Think outside the box, rather than sort of sticking with the status quo because that's easier and there are resources out there. Expanding what you perceive to be your potential primary sources, or even your secondary sources, and what you can use to sort of as part of your research, because that has expanded as well. Um, if you have concerns about what you're doing, ask your teacher, ask a librarian. That's what the folks are there for. And many are more than willing to help you. You just kind of have to do that. Don't be afraid to talk to people outside your department, kind of like you're doing now. Talk to people, okay, so that Dr. So-and-so does research in this particular area. Go talk to that person. Your resources don't have to always be books, or sometimes by talking to different professors who do research in certain areas, then that person can connect you to different things. So just kind of being open to what you want to do, to how you do your research. I think that's a pretty good tip for right now.
Very good. And for your research, so you're into women's studies, the Black diaspora movement for women.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything else that you will ever think about researching? Is there anything else you want to get into?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm almost hesitant to share some of it, because that is one of the things that at least they told me when I was pursuing my doctorate. And unfortunately, I've heard it over the years, is that sometimes when you're a graduate student pursuing your research, there are people who sort of take your ideas without your knowledge. Yeah, and so sometimes you're hesitant to share. I guess because it's recorded, then it's mine. But because you're hesitant, people are hesitant to share their ideas and things. But one of the things I'm most interested in, and interestingly enough, it sort of popped up in my novels on the African diaspora. But it also stemmed from this opportunity I had at Minnesota State University in Mankato, Minnesota, to teach classes on coming of age, gender, and culture. So I am very much into sort of looking at coming of age narratives for girls, written by young women, or women, period, specifically women of color. Again, that seems to be where I see a lot of void, a lot of absence in terms of the literature we know about. I mean, it's a lot out there, but in terms of what we know about is kind of minimal. And what gets discussed or talked about in most of our classes, whether English or otherwise, tends to be minimal in terms of women of color, Black women, women of color, and what we've written. So definitely coming of age narratives by women of color. Definitely something I am interested in. After this Afrofuturism conference, I'm also looking to get more into the science fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, horror genres as a part of that concept of Afrofuturism. Um, I also am interested in women's resistance literature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that tends to be more um, nonfiction than fiction, though there is some crossover or a little bit of both. But sort of looking at how women talk about how they resist, in the face of war or trauma, in the face of, being of people attempting to make them voiceless, to take away their voices. So, yeah, there's a lot that I, in a sense, kind of want to work with. But my major one right now is coming of age literature, and there are some really interesting things I want to do with that one in terms of which actually involve different kinds of research. So even kind of first person narratives, recording people doing interviews or whatever in ways that I haven't done before. So um, yeah, that's where I want to go. I'm excited about that.
Sounds great. And I want to thank you for your time for the interview. I know we went completely over 15 minutes,
It's fine.
but thank you so much. This was so interesting.
You're welcome, and thank
Yes.
you.